We need to get comfortable working at the command line, because that is going to be the ask when we go out into the job market and we want to stay relevant. That is what is being asked of AD admins today.
Mobile workforces, cloud applications, and digitalization are changing every aspect of the modern enterprise. And with radical transformation come new business risks. Welcome to Hybrid Identity Protection, the premier podcast for cybersecurity pros charged with defending hybrid identity environments. Presented by Semperis, the pioneers of identity-driven cyber resilience for the hybrid enterprise. And now, here's your host, 15-time Microsoft MVP and Active Directory security expert, Sean Dubey.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the HIP Podcast. My guest today is Mike Kanakos. Mike is a senior systems engineer in the Identity and Access Management team for Align Systems. Mike lives in Apex, North Carolina, and he's a big advocate of participating in the tech community. He's the co-leader of the Research Triangle PowerShell user group and the director of community events for PowerShell.org. He also blogs online at www.networkadm.in and writes for various tech websites. Mike also was a speaker for HIP Raleigh, where he also talked about automation and how to work remotely on things, which seems to be a very appropriate topic right now. So how are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, so you are now, it sounds in our conversation, you are now involved in a lot of automation, a lot of streamlining for a company that is, since this is talking about hybrid, a company that really is working on moving a lot of its footprint into the cloud.
So an interesting scenario for myself. I am working for a company that had said to me, hey, we really want everything to be off-prem. We want nothing on-prem. And we really want to automate away the routine, redundant, mundane tasks. So we're not there yet, but the idea is an automation first sort of strategy.
Right. Got it. So what you're doing, you're basically come in and said, look, we can make this better. We don't want to repeat all the stuff that is just time consuming and inconsistent by doing it manually. You're doing it in an automated manner. And you're a big advocate of remote access, very streamlined via automation rather than by the big RDP session, click here, click there, that sort of thing, right?
Well, so yes. And the reason is because I think we don't have a choice. I think as time marches on, RDP is going to become more and more of a privilege that less and less of us will have. And even though most of the people that are in the identity and access space may be your traditional AD admins who may have domain admin access and things like that, RDP relies on a GUI, and more the GUI is becoming a thing of the past. There will always be a GUI that will be used, but it's clear that the companies of today are designing systems that are allowed to be accessed through command line, through API, through these types of systems, and the GUI is the last choice. So while I enjoy working on a GUI, I am really just being cognizant of what is being presented to me and trying to be able to stay relevant with what is being asked of myself in the role that I'm at.
Well, as an old school IT pro AD person that, never got deeply into automation, if I could represent all the folks out there in industry that haven't really gotten to it, or if they do some of it, they automate tasks that they do on their PC or what have you, but they haven't done anything, or they've done very little as far as remote access. How would you advise someone like that to get started in this, or what principles would you advise them?
I want everybody to understand, because a lot of people think that I'm this automation whiz, or that I am super comfortable with the command line, that I never want to be in the GUI. I am also a GUI admin who came up in the ranks of 20 plus years as an admin, always at a GUI, always shied away from those guys who knew how to write VB and all that stuff. So this is a new experience for myself as well. But I have just realized that there are certain things, like if we're talking Active Directory, there are just things you can't do in the GUI very easily. And one of the things that I'm constantly being asked is to produce data sets of our users. Hey, can you give me all the users that are in this OU? Can you give me all the users that are in this city that have a cell phone number in AD? Those kinds of things. Last time passwords changed. Any sort of task like that, if it's not designed in the GUI, it becomes an arduous task to figure out how to bolt on those additional fields that you might need to get. If AD doesn't provide a way for you to do that, and let's say AD uses computers or something newer like Active Directory Administrative Center, I have learned that as you work with the command line more and you get comfortable running those commands over time, it has become my preference, and I think I can work faster at the command line now than if I had to go into GUI. And I feel now that it seems odd to say it, but I'm now at the point where the GUI feels like a burden to me compared to the command line. But I will tell you that at some point, I looked at the command line at the exact opposite. So how do we get there? I am friends with a gentleman named Jeff Hicks, who is a big name in the PowerShell community, who writes lots of information on how people can learn. And he said something to me that I thought was very eye-opening. And he said, if you want to learn a language, you would never try to learn French and do it once a month. You would never get there. And so he said, if you want to learn a language, you need to commit doing it every day, even if it's just for a little bit. And I've kind of taken that to heart. And once you start to do it every day, it becomes a little bit more easier to do and more comfortable. And the more comfortable we are with that, the less cumbersome it becomes to produce work using the command line that you used to be able to pull from the GUI.
So what you're saying is force yourself, and if you're about to execute some kind of a task, force yourself to say, all right, how would I do this with PowerShell?
So I would agree with that. However, I will give you a quick anecdote. About 5 years ago, I felt the need to learn PowerShell. For me, that's the language I like to work in because I'm very much a Microsoft admin and an Active Directory admin, and that is really the gateway of choice to use to get to the data. So one day, a request came in, and I said, the next request that comes into the help desk, I am going to do with PowerShell. And it was something like a password reset or something like that. Well, it took me 2 hours because I had no idea what I was doing. And what I quickly learned from doing that was, that's not going to be acceptable in the business world when you have SLAs and people need things in a prompt manner. So I needed to carve out some time on a regular basis to say, I can work on this and I can do it in a time where it's not time sensitive and it's not where a task is dependent on me finishing it so that I don't feel the pressure. And that kind of was an eye opener for me because before that, I was just taking stabs at it and I could never put the pieces together. So I always avoided learning the topic in general.
In other words, perhaps maybe during the course of a week, collecting a list of tasks that you had to perform and you got done the usual way. But then you had a list of tasks that you could set yourself to figure out how to do with PowerShell to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah. So, another way to look at this, and everybody has their own sort of motivations for why they think they need to do things. But I've always thought that there are tasks that are good for humans and there's tasks that are good for machines. And the tasks that are good for humans are the ones that require a lot of thought and don't always necessarily follow a pattern. You need to solve an issue. This behavior is happening and we don't understand why. Those are human tasks that I think are very good things that we should do. But then there's tasks like, hey, once a week, I need you to produce a report of all the people who haven't logged in 14 days. And I don't know anybody who enjoys that task. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some enjoyment to be taken from that. But if that's the type of task that I think is ripe for automation, ripe for the command line, it's a repeatable task. The requirements are laid out in a very clear manner, and you can work towards it. And once you solve it, it's really work that goes away for you.
Right. It's something that it takes a lot of work on the front end, but then you never have to repeat it on the back end.
Yeah. So to that point, I am not advocating that, automation can do everything. There is a lot of talk in the community about people who say you should automate yourself out of a job. And I do agree with that to some extent. But there is never going to come a point where everything can be done with automation. And I think if you had your choice, you really want to do the work that is technically challenging, allows you to use your creativity, and maybe if you're someone who's been in the field for a while, relies on your experience. Those are the things that I want to be engaged in. And those are the things that really automation doesn't speak to so much. And that's why if you can get rid of the everyday mundane tasks, I feel like it frees you up to do the work that sometimes is more rewarding.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, speaking of the everyday tasks or the mundane tasks, what about using automation tools for queries and operational aspects? What about administration along the line of access to domain controllers? You know, you mentioned earlier the GUI was becoming more and more optional for servers. Where does someone tackle remote administration via command line? How does one get started?
Well, in the Microsoft world, I think you have two avenues here. So remember that to have a GUI requires a certain amount of code, and that code will always have bugs, security flaws in it, which requires patching. So by virtue, having the option to connect via GUI or having operating systems that run via GUI always means you're going to have a bigger build as versus a non-GUI system. So the preference is going to be from security teams to move to these non-GUI systems, but that doesn't mean that the GUI isn't going to exist. And as I said, maybe the GUI on a box will be smaller, or maybe the GUI will be removed from a system, but there'll be a GUI sort of jump box and you'll do your work from there. And that's exactly what exists today in the Microsoft arena. We have PowerShell as a tool that we use to connect to systems, and we can install now Server Core, which is just command line. But then when we need to use the GUI, we can install a tool like Windows Admin Center, and we can use that as a jump off point to connect to remote systems. So we can use the GUI tools when it's more advantageous to do something like monitoring and you want to do perfmons. But then we can use the command line when we need to do data pulls, and that would be the remote server administration tools and the Active Directory module for AD. And that's where I think it starts. So anybody who wants to learn AD, identity management, you need to get your feet wet with the AD administration tools and start there. Get AD user, get AD computer, get AD group, get AD group member, and get AD principal group member. Those are the 5 core commandlets that you really need to master. If you can do those 5, that is really a large majority of a lot of the work that people need to do when they have to deal with directory service access requests for Active Directory.
Right. So you're saying once you get comfortable with doing everything that those 5 core commandlets can do, that's a big step on the way.
Yeah. So because I mean, when we get requests from other teams or we have to do administration work, we have to deal with creating users, querying users, finding out what groups they're in, what groups they're a member of, what groups they have access to. Those 5 commandlets are really the core of AD's toolset to work with users and groups. Now, there's plenty of other commandlets for replication and DNS and all those other things, but I would say anybody who's doing AD on a day-to-day basis probably needs to be rock solid at those 5 commandlets. And if you can do that, you can pick up the others as you go. But those are really a great starting point.
I guess to close up, we had talked about the security involved around using command line versus using a GUI, but there's another aspect of it that is not technical, and as you were relating earlier, which is around job security, not just computer security.
Yeah, so I am a new employee at Align Systems. I was brought in because of my comfort with the automation. And the reason I bring that up is I have interviewed for new positions twice in the last year. And the forefront of those interviews was tell us your comfort level at the command line, show us examples of how you've automated things, give us examples of redundant tasks that you were able to eliminate. So I think those are questions that are not questions that have been asked of me before 5 years ago. Those are just not in the normal purview of an AD admin, and those are sort of becoming the norm. So this speaks to the reason why we need to get comfortable working at the command line, because that is going to be the ask when we go out into the job market and we want to stay relevant. That is what is being asked of AD admins today.
That's really great advice, Mike. And it sounds like you can speak to having experienced this yourself. So that's always an extra level of validation in a situation. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. We hope to be next time we have one of these HIP conferences, and next time we'll run into each other one way or another, whether it's virtually or in person.
I look forward to it.
Thanks for joining us on the Hybrid Identity Protection Podcast with Sean Dubey. Be sure to subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Visit hipconf.com, that's HIPCONF.com, to learn about upcoming events, view expert presentations, and take part in the conversation.